You did not want to vote for either the BJP or the Congress.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lonely place to be in.
Liberals across the world are facing an existential challenge.
Liberals are under a siege.
The other thing that liberals, I believe, get wrong is understanding nationalism.
So, Barkha, there's a difference between good nationalism and bad nationalism.
Explain that.
Good nationalism is about
Why are you hopeful?
why we have 330 million gods and no god can afford to feel jealous.
Liberals and religion. What do you make of it?
I went to Harvard and I studied philosophy. When I went in, I believed in God and in socialism. When I came out,
Let's hear the Vicks VapoRub story.
one year there was a flu in the country. This meant that we sold a hell of a lot of Vicks VapoRub.
I don't remember a recent time in history when being a liberal felt or looked quite so irrelevant. You have an entire book that talks about the dilemma of being an Indian liberal. But this isn't just about Indian liberals. The American election results show to us that liberals across the world are facing an existential challenge. What has happened?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's worldwide, and liberals are under a siege, if you will. And the fault is on both sides. The left blames liberalism because of inequality in their countries. They hate globalization now, which was a very central part of the prosperity that came in the latter half of the 20th century. And so they're concerned with market power. The right feels that liberals have let them down because of loss of community, loss of traditions, that liberals are too thinking of themselves
As superior?
and the feeling of, yes, they have this elitism. And in India, that elitism is exacerbated even more because today, 75 years after independence, all the serious business of the private sector and the government is done in English. And maximum 10-15% people are comfortable in English. So imagine if somebody was sitting here with us today, a bright young lad, and he would have felt deaf and in his own country. And to feel deaf after 75 years after independence. So the reality, and of course I'm not suggesting that we need to have Hindi as our language. It's partly our country. I mean, we are a multilingual country. But I think we could have done a better job of integrating English, and because it gives us a lot of advantages with our mother tongues. So if we had continued a strong culture, unfortunately education has failed us, but that really is part of the problem.
Now, Gurcharan, you have written about how the one big failing of liberals has been the relationship with faith and religion. The absence of a language to communicate with a larger population. I always say that I, as a journalist, failed to understand many of the politico-religious debates of our time because I didn't have that language. I wasn't molded in that way. When we look at the relationship between liberals and religion, what do you make of it?
Well, I grew up in a family where my father was a mystic. And it was a bhakti sect. And so we grew up with a lot of spirituality. Not religion typically, but spirituality around us. And then, of course, I went to Harvard and I studied philosophy. I lost, when I went in, I believed in God and in socialism. When I came out, I'd lost my faith in God and in socialism. And so I grew up in that family, but I had a father who was also a liberal. He was spiritual, and he knew that I had lost my faith, but he never reminded me of that, never pushed it down my throat. And so I have grown an agnostic, but with a deep respect, unlike Marx or unlike the left, unlike Freud, unlike all these 19th century thinkers, and even today Dawkins, they have a contempt for people who are religious. In my case, I have a lot of respect. I just feel, what my father used to say, that you have to be lucky to have faith. And I give you one example of being what I mean, which convinces me that I am a true liberal. I think about 10 years ago, I was in Chennai, in Madras, and I went to the famous Madras Museum, and in the front of the portico, there's a wonderful statue, Chola statue of the Shiva dancing, the Tandava dance. And so I admired the beauty of the lines, what the sculpture had done, the whole aesthetic quality. And then a woman, barefoot, Tamil woman, was behind me, and she came up and she put a vermilion mark on the Shiva. And I was horrified. The liberal in me said, my God, doesn't she know this is a museum? It's not a temple. And then I moved on and I looked in my niggly middle class English speaking mind. There was one sculpture was not well lit, another had dust on it, and my sort of that kind of. And then, anyway, I came back to after a circle of the other beautiful sculptures, I came back to this Shiva's sculpture, and the woman was still there. And now there was a marigold flower on his feet.
Yeah.
But this time, my reaction was different. I thought to myself that look at her. For her, this is eternity she is visiting. She is seeing the creation of the universe with the dance of her God.
Yeah.
And look at me, I'm admiring the lines of the Chola sculptor and worried about the dust and the lighting of the thing. And I suddenly saw the richness of her life and the poverty of my life. Now, here's a person who's an agnostic, who looks on a person. Now, that is a liberal. A liberal does not judge. A liberal is tolerant of others. And that's the problem today, that we have such extremes who know with certainty, with moral certainty, that they are right. And so, I lost my friends on the right when I criticized the Gujarat riots of 2002. I lost my friends on the left when in 2014 I was so disgusted with the corruption in the UPA2 government that Modi came like a fresh breeze with his message of Vikas and minimum government, maximum governance. And so I actually supported and voted for him. And I lost all my friends on the left. They have still never forgiven me, although after demonetization, I have been very critical of the...
One of the things you recently said is that you feel, I don't know if you still feel it, but you said it recently, that people like you have no one to vote for.
Yes.
Is that still the case?
Yes. I mean, this was my problem in this last Lok Sabha.
2024?
Yeah, this...
You did not want to vote for either the BJP or the Congress?
Yeah. I mean, it was a lonely place to be in. I couldn't vote for Mr. Modi because I thought that our democracy was turning illiberal because of all the things they were doing and the whole anti-Muslim rhetoric, etc. And so, I mean, I really worried about our democracy. I couldn't vote for anyone except perhaps Chandrababu Naidu. I would have voted for him. But I couldn't vote for anyone in the opposition.
Rahul Gandhi?
I couldn't vote for them because they had 10 years in the opposition and they had not come up with one good idea for the real problems of India. The problem of jobs, the problem of clean air, and many education, health, all these are real problems in our country, and not one spoke about the real problems of the country in the elections.
So do you feel disenfranchised in a way? I mean, you have the vote, so disenfranchised is the wrong word, but politically alienated.
Yes, I mean, I feel and that's the dilemma of the Indian liberal. He can't vote for anyone. I used to be a member of the Swatantra Party.
So hold that story because there's a story there. So let's take you back to your years at Procter Gamble. We are not yet past license Raj, which means that the government is literally involved in every decision.
Right.
And you are promoting Vicks VapoRub, which is, I think, something that we all grew up with our parents rubbing it on our chests when we had a cold. And you are then summoned by a bureaucrat in government who actually threatens to send you to jail for 3 years. So tell us that story, because that story leads you to the Swatantra Party, which for young people in our audience is perhaps India's only attempt at a centre-right party, a socially liberal but right wing on economics. But we'll get to that. Let's first hear the Vicks VapoRub story.
Right. Well, so after university, I was supposed to go and do a PhD in philosophy at Oxford, but the last minute I got cold feet and I said, did I want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No, I wanted a life of action. I didn't know what it was, but we had a nosy neighbor in Chandigarh where we lived, and she used to ask my mother, she used to come to visit my mother, and she'd say, Thoda munda ki kar raha hai? What's your son doing? And my mother would get very embarrassed, so I saw the embarrassment on her face, and I answered the first advertisement in the paper I found. It was a company that made Vicks VapoRub, which needed trainees. And this is very early times, 1963. Anyway, so I was in business by accident. Suddenly I was transported from the ivy-covered halls at Harvard to the dusty bazaars of India. But I liked the rough and tumble of the business life. And I began to do well in the company, and I rose. And one year there was a flu in the country. And this meant that we sold a hell of a lot of Vicks VapoRub. And we even ran 3 shifts in our factory. And the end of the year, we were celebrating. We were considered by it was an American company, by the world headquarters, that we were the best of the lot. That day, a summons arrived for me. I was now the head of the company, and which said that we had broken the law. And what was this law? It was the licensing law, which said you could produce only so many tons of Vicks VapoRub in a year. And we had exceeded it by like 30%.
So your fault was that you were producing too much Vicks VapoRub.
Yes. And I mean, I thought we had done good, you know, keeping millions of homes.
Yes.
It's some relief, and maybe not a cure, but a relief. Anyway, so I'm summoned, I waited in there, and I'm treated like a criminal. As soon as I arrive at the office, I'm kept waiting by the joint secretary. And when I come in with two lawyers, the officer is reading the newspaper, and we keep waiting. He keeps reading until he finally puts his paper down and he says, "Kya?" And I said, "Saab, aap bataiye kya? Aapne bulaya hai hame." So, and he says, "Well, tell me what it is." So I showed him the summons and I said, "You've called me." And so he looks at the summons. "So you broke the law." I said, "Yes, but look what we did. We did a lot of good during this year." And anyway, I explained the circumstances. And he says, "But you broke the law." And I said, "Yes, but." He says, "Yes, but no. You tell me yes or no." I said, "Yes, we broke the law." And then he says, "You chaps in the private sector, you're all crooks. And especially multinational companies. We've suffered enough during the East India Company. So I want to make an example of your company. And that now the law will take its own course." So I was shivering by then. But I don't know what got into me. And then he said, "Jao." So I'm at the door of his office going out, and I turn around. And I don't know what got into me, but I said to him, "Sir, this news, it's not every day a multinational company executive goes to jail in the world. And we are an international company, so it'll appear in all the press. And the story will appear that here was a company that did so much good during an epidemic for its people. And the laws of this country sent him to jail. How will the people of the world think of our country? What will they think of our Prime Minister? What will they think of you?" I said that. And he said, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No, I'm just telling you this is what's going to happen." And he says, "Jao." And I come out and the lawyers are angry with me. They said, "Look, what is this? You should have fallen on his feet and begged for mercy.
Yeah.
And you were threatening him." Anyway, I had sleepless nights for several weeks. And then the government just quietly, some sense got into somebody's head. And they dropped the whole matter.
And this happens, and
then I went, in a week after that, I went and joined the Swatantra Party.
But the Swatantra Party is nowhere today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, what a tragedy.
Rajagopalachari's party, his vision for a modern, socially liberal, but market-driven economy.
Yes.
That model doesn't exist today. And dare I argue with you that I don't think it actually exists anywhere in the world. Because even if you look at the West, let's pick up the United States or the United Kingdom, whether it is buffeting people with social security, highly unionized, by the way, cultures in both the US and the UK, or our own model of sort of welfare capitalism. We've seen the impact of the Ladki Behan scheme on the Maharashtra results. Do you think this is just a theoretical model made out?
Yeah. You're right in everything you've said. But you have to still remember that for 250 years, liberalism has been the reigning philosophy of the world. It lifted people up from first of all, democracy. Country after country became democratic. from monarchical, aristocratic, feudal power. And it freed people also from the feudal economic system by making respectable the market system.
But hold on, you are conflating political freedom and economic freedom.
Both are part of liberalism.
But I'm
a classical liberal, not a left liberal.
That's right. But if you look around the world, there are countries where the markets have been opened, calibrated, but opened, but democratic rights not necessarily.
No.
Right? And in fact, democracy has been curtailed while the market has been encouraged.
Yes. This is the interesting irony of India, because we are exceptional in this way that for the first 40 years of our history, India was a robust democracy, and we have to thank Mr. Nehru for that, with real institutions which gave enormous freedom to religious freedom, social freedom, freedom of speech, etc., etc. But we did not give economic freedom to our people. We had a command economy. Now, again, it's Nehru's fault, but you don't blame him. I blame Mrs. Gandhi, because Nehru's time, this was the reigning ideology. And we copied the Soviet Union in creating that second 5-year plan and the whole business of lifting, anyway, we won't go into all that. But the reality is that for 40 years, we were politically, socially liberal, but economically illiberal. We were saddled with a low... We lost 2 generations, Barkha, to opportunities for young people, for jobs, because the only way was to get a government job.
Would you say that we are economically liberal today?
Well, certainly after 1991,
yes,
we have grown at 6.5% a year. Now, for a democracy, that's damn good. It's not as good as China. We've lifted 450 million. Liberalism has lifted 450 million people out of poverty. And in between the first 40 years of socialism, we did not, poverty remained at that same level. The middle class has grown from 10% to 30%. Again, this is not as good as China, but the failure is that we have not created enough jobs, and that is because we have not created enough.
And China does not have the democracy that we do.
China doesn't have democracy, but it has a lot better governance and a lot better accountability.
But I think we're rare in that way, that we have tried to walk the parallel path of political democracy and economic opening up.
Yes.
I know other countries like the United States of America have attempted it too. But I must push back on your free market wala sensibility by asking you, what is the obligation of the state? The state also has an obligation to its people.
Yes.
And I would say education, health, right? And education and health in particular, and I would even include the quality of the air that we breathe. This is an obligation of the state.
I totally agree with you. The obligation of as a classical liberal, I believe in a safety net as well.
Yes.
And certainly education and health. The government, in our case, I'm convinced the government has to provide for it. It has to, but it doesn't have to run schools and colleges. That, in our case, what's happened is the government schools have failed. Therefore, 48% of our children are in private school. And these are not elite private schools. And the average private school here charges a fee of 600 rupees a month. That's not elite school. But the quality has suffered enormously. And I blame the government, because it is not only the regulator of education, but it also runs its own schools. And so all I'm saying is, yes, the government has an obligation in education and health. Completely right. And Amartya Sen was completely right in focusing on that. But I'm also saying that it doesn't have to run the schools, and so I don't think we are that far apart. The classical liberal in India, not just the left liberals, the classical liberal, maybe not the libertarian. For a few years, I became libertarian after the Vicks VapoRub experience. But now I wrote a book called India Grows at Night When the Government Sleeps, when I realized the governance, that we still did not have good governance.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I mean, today, the need is as much to fix the institutions of the state. It is state capacity that lets us down.
The other thing that liberals, I believe, get wrong is understanding nationalism. Now, in your writings, you have argued that you think the nation state itself is a kind of tribalism. I would push back against that and say that most people, if you ask in a commonsensical sort of way, do respond to symbols of the state, the flag, the anthem, the constitution, with a great deal of sentimentality. And the Indian military has young people, men and women, who die for the flag.
So, Barkha, there's a difference between good nationalism and bad nationalism.
Explain that.
Good nationalism is about cheering for my cricket team. Good nationalism is about the flag and all the things you just mentioned, including, for me, it brought me back to India. Good nationalism is about my memory of my grandmother telling me stories from the Mahabharata. It's my memories of going to school in Shimla and the snowy mountain peaks of the Himalayas. So it's about our history, our geography, our things. Bad nationalism is about power. And power of all kinds, whether it is political power, military power, economic power, a liberal is always wary of that. And so
power makes the world go round.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And that's why liberals, as you said, all over the world, liberals are in a lonely place because they are not in power anywhere. But what I wanted to tell you is that, look, liberalism is too good an idea. The idea that you should be careful about power, you should be wary of power, the idea that you should be tolerant of other people's views, that Madras Museum story I told you, the idea that you're open-minded, essentially.
But we live in
a good idea.
Yes, true. But
and also they have lifted people all over the world for 250 years.
But we live in a world where people across political affiliations are no longer willing to engage. You said that you lost friends on both the right and the left for just having an opinion, right?
That's right.
Within the framework of a democracy, you had an opinion, you expressed the opinion, and you lost friends. This is the reality of the time that we live in, where you're supposed to raise your hand and say, I'm left or right. If I asked you that question
absolutely
today,
right.
So let me ask you that question. Are you left or right? What would you say?
No, I'm in the center. I can tell you the reason. I mean, I am on the right because I prefer market outcomes to outcomes decided by a bureaucrat.
Yes.
I am closer to the left in terms of my social views, where you can do any religion, you can. In the most extensive, I was a student of Rawls, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
And he's the great god of liberalism. So what I'm trying to say is, look, the left, first of all, both sides are intolerant, but there is good in both sides that we should admire. The left reminds us about the poor, and that's a great thing. And the right reminds us about the importance of community and some of these values. So, but what I was trying to say to you is that we are in a difficult place today But liberalism has defeated far worse enemies. It has defeated fascism and Hitler and the Phalange in the Second World War. It has defeated communism by 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European Soviet. It's now the enemy that's facing us is much weaker than.
I know you remain, and in your book you end with why you're optimistic about liberalism. But before we come to that, I think we must talk about the American elections, because many of these themes, they're very contemporary in the context of US politics, and US politics does impact. What happens in US impacts the world. Now, Trump is not from the grassroots. Trump is a social elite himself. And yet he is able to successfully locate himself as a challenger to the political elite. And the political elite is today identified in the US with the left. How does this happen that somebody who's actually socially elite?
Yeah. No, it's a very very clever situation, because he has seen the resentment of the electorate. He has seen the fact that a certain elite has ruled the country, both on the Republicans and the Democratic side. And the reality also is that the standard of living of the middle class has not improved for 30, 40 years. The inordinate amount of the gains of the economy have gone to the people in the finance sector, to Wall Street. And so all these are real resentments of people. Jobs have been lost both to China and India. The blue-collar jobs to China, the white-collar jobs to India. China became the factory of the world. India became the back office of the world. So that's a resentment against immigrants that he has tapped into. So he has tapped into the resentment. And so both the people on the right and the left have moved towards him, which makes him successful. But I don't see this, as a long-term phenomena. It's a present-day phenomena.
But see, the first time you could have called Trump's win an aberration. The second time you can't call it that.
No, you're right. The resentment was obviously much deeper than by.
So now apply that here. You have been, while you voted for the Prime Minister in 2014, you have been a critic of what is loosely described as Hindu nationalism.
Right.
At the same time, there is a kind of social churn in the public discourse around the place of religion in our society. L.K. Advani fashioned the phrase pseudo-secularism, and it grew roots. It obviously grew deep roots, and it has yielded political returns for the BJP. What does the Indian liberal need to learn and understand and internalize about religion and its place in public life?
Yeah, I think the model is Gandhi, because he was a liberal who was able to talk in the language of the people. In other words, he converted the liberal ideas of the Enlightenment, of liberty and equality, into the language of dharma, sadharan dharma.
Yes.
And he won over the Indian people. And that's one of the reasons why India got its freedom in the shadows of Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, without shedding an ounce of blood. And so, after him, Mr. Nehru he gave many, many speeches, but ultimately he couldn't reach the people because he was a Western-oriented gentleman. He represented the class of the brown sahibs that stepped into the shoes of the white sahibs who left. And I had hoped at least some leader, maybe Jai Prakash Narayan, Shastri. If Shastri had lived, they were not of that Brown Sahib class, and I think that's our tragedy as a country.
And we should acknowledge that Modi was also able to successfully power his politics with the story of him being self-made.
Yes, and in fact, self-made, and he was able to capture that same resentment that Trump did.
Yeah.
And hats off. I mean, people. I mean, liberals like me, and there were others who, in 2014, were willing to give him a chance. His message of Vikas, Parivartan, was, and the idea of minimum government, maximum governance, all this was music.
Has any of it, today you say you don't feel inspired to vote for either side.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would give the Modi government credit for?
Yes, I would give a hell of a lot of credit, because today our priority is jobs, and Modi has created the best preconditions for an industrial revolution. And why? Today, the infrastructure, road mileage has doubled since 2011. Port handling capacity has quadrupled. You have a digital revolution, which means that people with bank accounts have gone from 42% to 88%. So you have that financial inclusion. Plus, and he's used technology. Actually, corruption still exists. But technology is making more and more difficult for that petty corruption, which has been the bane of our country. So I would just say that even now, I think India under Modi has a better chance of creating an industrial revolution than under Rahul Gandhi.
Because
I
mean, both believe in a kind of welfare. Like, I think there's a political consensus on welfareism.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, in fact, he's done a better job of Modi has done a better job of giving the DBT through the DBT transfer route, the welfare
cash benefits.
Well, I mean, the idea of cooking gas, toilets, all these are real achievements. The reason why I say it is because I'm sorry to have to really say this, because really the DNA of the Congress party, and this is not the party of Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh at that time in history, which did the reforms. And we were let down as liberals when Manmohan Singh's in the UPA 1 and 2, especially UPA 2. My belief, the DNA of the Congress party is not economically liberal. The DNA of the Congress party is statist. That they'll first talk about the answer will always be what can the state do for you, and that's why when it comes to jobs, they never talk about the problem of private. They talk about government jobs. They don't talk about private sector jobs as a real problem. And that's the only way the country will be lifted. I mean, 45% of our people, Barkha, of working people are on the farm. That is double the people we need. We can't take them all into software and these IT, etc. So we need to create what I mean is a factory success. And those who say that time is up are also wrong. We have at least, just as we have about 15, 20 years for a demographic dividend, we have the same 15 years to create and industrial revolution.
So these are the things you admire about the Prime Minister, or grant him as his achievements, and obviously your disquiet is over the religious politics.
But let me also say at the same time that I don't think Mr. Modi is either a ideological reformer like Deng Xiaoping or Margaret Thatcher. He is he's an East Asian modernizer, pragmatic modernizer. And that's why my worry for the future is we still need to do the reforms, the farm reforms to create a second agricultural
I mean, the
revolution.
farmers are protesting as we speak at the borders of Delhi.
Because nobody has sold them. This was the problem with the land. All the 3 laws that we lost, which we need to do, the land acquisition, the labor codes, labor laws, and the farm. Plus, we also need to do more laws. And the trouble is that reform in everywhere has to be sold. Margaret Thatcher used to say, I spend 20% of my time reforming, 80% selling the reform.
Yeah.
No one, not since Narasimha Rao, has sold the reforms to the people. People still believe the reforms make the rich richer and the poor poorer. They can't distinguish between being pro-market and pro-business. And so what we need is today and this is not in Mr. Modi's DNA, he needs to be, particularly now with an opposition that's charged up with a coalition, he needs to be much more collaborative. He needs to sell those reforms. He needs, that's why that's why I say I believe 6.5% is what we will do instead of 8, which is what we could do.
Let me end with how your book ends. An optimistic note for liberalism, despite this sort of near obituary in this conversation. You are hopeful.
Yes.
Why are you hopeful?
Well, one, I'm hopeful because I think the Indian temper is liberal. And I spend a whole chapter explaining, beginning with the Rig Veda, how that skeptical nature, and how in the Upanishads, Upanishads are mental experiments done 2,500 years ago in the forests and so on. And why the different schools, why I am agnostic but a respectable Hindu. And why we have 330 million gods and no god can afford to feel jealous. So all this are many reasons. Plus, our temper is liberal. That's why I feel the shelf life of Hindutva is limited. Secondly, I think liberalism, as I said, is too good an idea to die. It has, over the last why has it been the reigning ideology of the last 250 years in the world?
Well, we end this conversation with a lot to think about. Gurcharan Das, man of many parts, author, prolific author, in fact, and we have covers of all your most recent books up on our screen at this point. I know you're bringing only some of them with you. Your columns, you're a column writer, you're a public intellectual, you're a corporate executive, and you are still a diehard believer in liberalism despite being a lonely liberal. Thank you, Gurcharan.
Thank you, Barkha.